I was standing in my new kitchen on a Thursday afternoon, scrubbing dried white paint off the Georgian windowsill with a damp sponge. The house smelled of fresh cedar, cardboard boxes, and that clean lemon floor wax I always buy at Meijer. Then my phone buzzed on the quartz island. It was Linda Harper, the 68-year-old QU broker who had sold us this colonial just 7 days ago. Her voice was thin, breathless, and coming through the speaker like a warning. "Lauren, I forgot to clear my admin access from your living room smart home hub," she whispered. "When I logged in to wipe my account 10 minutes ago, the cloud automatically played the audio logs from Tuesday night." She stopped, and I could hear the low hum of traffic from her end before she delivered the words that turned my stomach cold. "Don't tell your husband, Lauren, I saved the audio file to a secure drive. Come to my place, alone. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 42 years old. And for the last 12 years, I worked 60-hour weeks as a corporate compliance manager. My entire career was built on spotting the tiny lies people bury in the fine print." But standing there with water dripping from my sponge onto the hardwood floor, my mind went completely blank. Why would my husband Ethan be talking to his mother in our living room about something the former owner thought I needed to hide? If you were standing in my kitchen right now, would you have waited for him to come home? Or would you grab your car keys immediately? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And please let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are tonight. The windshield wipers on my Lexus kept a steady, irritating rhythm against the autumn drizzle all the way across town. The sky over Michigan looked like wet asphalt, heavy and low. I parked along the curb outside Linda Harper's small rental duplex, the brakes giving a slight squeal in the damp air. My hands were still cold from the steering wheel as I walked up the concrete steps, my heels clicking too loudly in the quiet neighborhood. When Linda opened the door, the small living room hit me with the overwhelming smell of chamomile tea and old paper. She looked smaller than she had at the closing table a week ago, her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Thank you for coming, Lauren," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. She didn't offer to take my coat, and I didn't offer to take it off. The air in the room felt too fragile for regular politeness. On her small oak kitchen table sat an old gray Lenovo ThinkPad, its screen throwing a harsh white light onto a half-empty ceramic mug. "I pulled the file from the cloud server before I deactivated the hub's link," Linda said, her fingers hovering over the trackpad with a slight tremor. "The Smart Assistant is programmed to log interactions during high-volume noise transitions, and it caught this on Tuesday night at 8:14 p.m. Tuesday. I was in Chicago at the Hilton, sitting through a presentation on federal banking regulations, texting Ethan that I was going to bed early." Linda looked at me once, her kind, wrinkled eyes carrying a heavy sort of pity that made my ribs tighten. She hit the spacebar. A low hiss of static came from the laptop's cheap built-in speakers, followed by the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Then, Ethan's voice filled the kitchen. It was his exact tone, that smooth, unhurried cadence he used when he was explaining our investment portfolio or telling me which restaurant he'd booked for date night. "The title company already cleared the primary deed," Ethan's voice said on the recording. "But the cash-out refinance paperwork needs to go through before the third quarter statements close at his firm." My chest stopped moving. I waited to hear his mother, Margaret, answering with her usual sharp, demanding tone, the one she used when she wanted to control family dinners. But she didn't. "Are you sure the bank won't flag the cross-collateralization clause?" Margaret's voice was lower, raspy from her usual morning cigarettes, but calm. "If the underwriting team double-checks the primary asset contribution, they'll see the commercial entity has zero equity." "They won't check," Ethan replied, and I could hear the distinct sound of him leaning back against our new leather sofa. "Because I'm structuring it as a standard post-closing administrative update. I'm inserting a limited power of attorney provision directly into the authorization schedule for the refinance. Once she signs the primary packet, I have full authority to execute the secondary draw without her name appearing on the public filings. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in Linda's kitchen. I clamped my fingers around the edge of the wooden chair, the varnish rough against my palm, trying to force my breathing to stay even. Ethan wasn't being dragged into this by his mother. He wasn't a passive husband caught between a demanding parent and a wife's money. He was the architect. Then Margaret laughed. A short, dry sound that I'd heard 100 times at Sunday brunches. Lauren handles compliance for international logistics firms. Ethan, she said, her voice dripping with a casual, chilling certainty. She spends her life tracking multi-million-dollar supply chain discrepancies. But she has a massive blind spot. She believes you. You just need to sandwich the disclosure form between page 14 and page 15 of the standard administrative packet. The font matches the county boilerplates, and she'll just luat quo it like she does with the routine utility transfers. She thinks this house is her fresh start after selling her business. She won't assume her husband is auditing her. The audio track ended with another click of ice against a glass. Linda closed the laptop screen halfway, the plastic casing giving a soft snap in the silence. I copied it to this, she said, sliding a small, black SanDisk thumb drive across the table toward me. It stopped right next to my car keys. I didn't scream, and I didn't cry. 12 years of corporate auditing teach you that when a system collapses, you don't panic. You look for the ledger. But inside my chest, a cold, heavy numbness was spreading out toward my fingertips, turning my skin tight and numb. The man who had held my hand at the closing table 7 days ago, smiling as I spent the money from my life's work, had already measured my trust and turned it into a financial exploit. I picked up the drive, its plastic edge sharp against my thumb, and dropped it into my coat pocket. "Thank you, Linda," I said, my voice sounding flat, distant, like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Don't worry about the Smart Hub anymore. I'll handle the account settings tonight." I walked back down the steps into the gray Michigan rain, the drive heavy in my pocket, my mind already calculating the hours until Ethan came home from his office. I pulled my Lexus over 2 blocks away from our new house, cutting the engine near an old oak tree that was dropping wet. Heavy leaves onto the asphalt. My hands were freezing against the steering wheel, but I didn't turn the heater back on. I just sat there in the dimming afternoon light, watching the rain pool in the potholes along the curb, forcing myself to swallow the dry lump of bile rising in my throat. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the hard, rectangular edge of the thumb drive Linda had given me. It felt incredibly heavy, like a lead weight pressing directly into my hip. After 10 minutes of staring at the dashboard, I restarted the car and crawled into our driveway. Through the large bay window of our living room, the scene looked like a painting of a perfect life. Warm, amber light spilled onto the porch, and I could see Ethan's shadow moving gracefully around the room, bending down to light 2 tall candles on the dining table. The sight of him made the skin on the back of my neck prickle with a deep, sickening revulsion. I unlocked the front door, the brass handle cold against my palm, and the heavy smell of seared garlic, rosemary, and expensive steak hit me instantly. "Lauren, is that you, honey?" Ethan called out from the kitchen, his voice carrying that soft, melodic lilt that had made me feel safe for 8 years. He stepped into the foyer, wiping his hands on a gray dish towel, looking every bit the doting husband. He had already changed out of his work suit into a soft cashmere sweater, and his smile was warm, open, and completely unbothered. "You look pale, babe," he murmured, walking over and gently brushing a stray, wet lock of hair behind my ear. His fingertips felt warm against my cold skin, and it took every ounce of my compliance-honed discipline not to flinch away from his touch. "Your hands are like ice. Where have you been?" Just went by the Ace Hardware on Broad Street," I said, the lie slipping out of my mouth with a smoothness that actually terrified me. "I noticed the guest bathroom bulb was flicking morning, so I wanted to grab a few replacements before the weekend." "Oh, good thinking," he said, nodding easily as he took my heavy coat and hung it in the closet. "Go wash up. I opened that bottle of Napa Cabernet you like, and the ribeyes are just about done resting." I stood over the bathroom sink for 2 full minutes, watching the warm water run over my knuckles, staring at my own eyes in the mirror. They looked flat, dead. I walked into the dining room and sat down on the leather chair I had picked out myself just 3 weeks ago. Ethan poured the wine, the dark red liquid splashing softly against the crystal glass. And then he set a perfectly cooked steak in front of me. "To our first full week in our forever home," he said, lifting his glass with a smile that reached his eyes. I tapped my glass against his, the ring of the crystal echoing in the quiet room, and took a small sip. It tasted like copper and wood. We talked about small things: the mail carrier who delivered to the wrong box, the squeak in the third step of the staircase, the weather forecast for the weekend. He was magnificent at it. He asked about my day with a genuine curiosity that I now realized was completely calculated to see if I was holding any suspicion. As I watched him cut his steak, his movements precise and relaxed, a terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. How much of our marriage had been this? How many of his late nights, his weekend business trips, his sudden bursts of affection over the last 8 years had been nothing more than lines rehearsed in front of a mirror? When the plates were cleared, Ethan didn't get up to clear the table. Instead, he reached down to the floor, lifted his leather briefcase, and placed a thick, blue manila folder right next to my half-empty wine glass. The cardboard folder gave a heavy, solid thud against the wood table. "Before we get too comfortable on the couch," he said smoothly, pulling a sleek silver pen from his pocket and laying it on top of the folder, "I brought home the post-closing administrative routine packet from the underwriting team at the bank. It's just the usual boring cleanup stuff everyone has to do after a primary deed transfer, optimizing the internal loan terms so we don't get hit with the county escrow lag next spring. It's mostly boilerplate disclosures, but I told them we'd look it over tonight. In fact, I told the loan officer they could just send a mobile notary to the house next Monday afternoon to save you a trip to the branch." He patted the folder gently, his hand resting on the paperwork with that easy, protective authority he always used to wrap around my life. I looked at the folder, then up at his handsome, calm face. If I hadn't driven to Linda's house, if I hadn't heard his voice in that small apartment, I would have smiled, patted his hand, and signed whatever page he pointed to. My stomach dropped into a cold, hollow pit of pure disgust, but my face remained perfectly, terribly still. "Of course," I said, my voice quiet and cooperative as I reached out and touched the edge of the blue folder. "Leave it right there. I'll go through it line by line before Monday." The digital clock on the bedroom nightstand read 2:14 a.m. when I finally slid my legs out from under the heavy duvet. Beside me, Ethan's breathing remained slow, deep, and perfectly rhythmic. He didn't stir when I picked up my phone, nor when my bare feet touched the cold oak floor of the hallway. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked down the dark staircase by memory, my hand lightly gripping the handrail, making sure to avoid the third step that had a faint, predictable squeak. The house was completely still, save for the low, distant rumble of a semi-truck out on the interstate. I sat down in the leather chair in my home office, closed the door until it clicked softly, and opened my laptop. The bright, cold blue light from the screen hit my face, casting long shadows across the unpacked boxes lining the wall. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. 12 years of managing corporate compliance for international firms had trained me for moments like this, moments where the system fails, and you have to dig into the raw data without letting your emotions muddy the ledger. I didn't look through Ethan's coat pockets. I didn't open his briefcase. Instead, I logged into our shared business DocuSign account, the one we had set up 2 years ago when we managed some minor rental logistics together. My fingers moved across the trackpad, clicking past the routine utility transfers and house insurance summaries until I found the pending refinance package he had laid on the dining table earlier. I clicked on the document properties and went straight to the electronic audit trail, the edit history. That was when the first real knot tightened in my gut. The file hadn't been generated by the bank this week as a post-closing routine. The original metadata showed the document shell had been created exactly 92 days ago. 92 days. That was 3 weeks before we even placed our primary bid on this colonial house. Back when my father's inheritance money from my business sale was still sitting in a liquid escrow account. The plan to execute this cash-out refinance hadn't been an afterthought or a response to bank underwriting. Ethan had mapped out the routing schedules and the limited power of attorney structure before the deed of this house even had my name on it. I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting off my eyes. I scrolled further down into the system access logs, tracking the user signatures and uploaded assets attached to the file. At 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday last month, a night Ethan told me he was staying late at the office to finish the quarterly payroll, he had uploaded a high-resolution PDF snippet into the DocuSign signature field. I zoomed in on the image file. It was a scanned copy of my physical signature, complete with the tiny, characteristic ink smudge at the end of the letter L. He had pulled it directly from our joint 2025 federal tax return. The system log showed he had run 3 separate verification tests against the document software, checking to see if the electronic formatting would flag the signature as an external duplicate or an unverified asset. He was testing the parameters of the bay. He was verifying how much weight the automated verification would take before it required a live, physical appearance from me. I closed the laptop screen halfway, the room plunging back into a heavy, suffocating darkness. I sat there in the dark office for a long time, staring at the small green power light of the internet router on the floor. The pain, the deep, sickening grief of realizing my 8-year marriage was a calculated transaction, was there. But I locked it behind a thick wall of cold, analytical logic. I didn't go upstairs to wake him up. I didn't scream. I just reached into my pocket, touched the small thumb drive Linda had given me, and realized the audit was over. Now, I needed to build my own file. The smell of Margaret's menthol cigarettes and expensive Chanel perfume always seemed to fill a room before she even stepped into it. On Saturday afternoon, she arrived at our house carrying 3 thick, glossy interior design catalogs and a small silver tape measure. She walked into my living room with that absolute, proprietary confidence of a woman who already owned the land beneath her feet. She didn't ask if she could take her boots off. She just marched straight across the newly polished hardwood floors, her eyes scanning the walls like an inspector checking for structural cracks. Ethan was right behind her, hovering like a proud apprentice, holding a pad of yellow legal paper and a pencil. "The mantelpiece has to go. Ethan," Margaret said, stretching the metal tape measure across the brick fireplace with a sharp click. "This builder-grade oak is fine for ordinary people, but if you're going to entertain proper clients here next spring, it needs to be solid Carrara marble." "I already talked to a stonemason over in Grand Rapids," Ethan replied smoothly, jotting something down on his pad with a relaxed smile. "He can have the slab delivered as soon as the administrative updates clear next week." I stood by the kitchen island, quietly pouring hot water into a ceramic teapot. The steam rose up, warming my face, but my inside felt like dry frost. I watched them through the open doorway, the subtle nods, the easy coordination, The way Margaret spoke about my house as if my 12 years of sweat and late nights building my company were just a minor detail in her family's grand real estate portfolio. It was a beautiful little theater production, and they were playing their parts perfectly. They thought I was just the quiet, exhausted wife who was too soft, too in love, and too distracted by cardboard boxes to look at the fine print. I carried the tea tray into the living room, setting it down softly on the mahogany coffee table. "Here's some Earl Grey, Margaret," I said, my voice sweet, even and thoroughly practiced. "Thank you, dear," Margaret murmured, not even looking at me as she flipped open a catalog filled with $10,000 sectional sofas. I sat down on the armchair, smoothed my jeans, and decided to nudge the system just enough to see how the software reacted. "You know, Ethan," I began casually, picking up my tea mug. "I was glancing through that underwriting packet you left on the dining table last night." Ethan's pencil paused for a fraction of a second, his shoulder tightening just a hair beneath his soft wool sweater. "Oh, yeah?" he asked, his voice remaining light, almost conversational. "Find anything interesting?" "Just a quick question for Margaret. Actually, since she knows the banking system so well," I said, turning my eyes directly onto my mother-in-law. "Does a standard post-closing refinance usually require a limited power of attorney attachment in the authorization schedule? I noticed a section on page 14 that seemed a bit dense for a routine escrow adjustment." Margaret's eyes flickered. It was tiny. A half-second freeze. A sudden hardness in her pupils that disappeared before she could even blink again. She let out a short, airy laugh, snapped her tape measure shut, and reached over to pat the back of my hand with a dry, cold palm. "Oh, Lauren, honey. Banks love to draw up a million unnecessary disclosures these days just to bill people for administrative hours. It's all absolute nonsense, dear. Don't you go stressing your pretty head over legal boilerplates. That's exactly why you married a man who ran financial management. You spent 12 years KII with your old firm, and you're finally in your dream house. It's time to let your husband Ganvac the heavy lifting." Ethan smiled, nodding right along with her, his eyes warm and completely reassuring as he reached over to squeeze my knee. "She's right, babe," he whispered softly. "I've got the underwriting team handled. You just relax." I smiled back at both of them. My teeth felt dry against my lips, and the revulsion inside my chest was building so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing into my ribs. They weren't just trying to move money. They were feeding me sweet, patronizing lies to keep me docile while they prepared to strip away everything I had built. They truly believe that a woman's love makes her stupid enough to hand over her life's work without looking. It makes me sick to my stomach just remembering how casual they were about ruining me. If you think a husband using your trust as a financial weapon against you is absolutely unforgivable, type 0 inches in the comments right now. I took another slow sip of my tea, looking at the blue manila folder sitting on the desk across the room. They thought they were fattening up a target. They had no idea I was already drafting the audit trail that would dismantle them. The stairs leading up to Sandra Collins' office were old, narrow, and smelled faintly of wood soap and damp basement air. Her office was located on the second floor of a restored federal-style brick building on Main Street, just 3 blocks down from the county courthouse. Inside, there were no flashy modern glass desks or tech startup leather couches. It was just rows of steel filing cabinets, thick binders of state property statutes, and a heavy mahogany desk cluttered with red-lined title charts. The air felt serious, dry, and thoroughly predictable. Exactly the kind of room where I felt safe. "Take a seat, Lauren," Sandra said, adjusting her red tortoiseshell reading glasses as she waved her hand toward a green banker's chair. She was 55, had silver-streaked hair cut into a sharp bob, and carried the weary but solid authority of a woman who had seen every possible mutation of real estate fraud in the state of Michigan. I didn't try to explain my feelings or tell her how much my chest had been hurting since Thursday afternoon. I just reached into my bag and set the black SanDisk thumb drive directly on the green desk blotter next to her coffee mug. The smart home audio logs are in folder 1, I told her, my voice dropping into that flat, clipped cadence I used for corporate tax reviews. Folder 2 contains the DocuSign access trail, the historical metadata logs from Ethan's office IP address, and the scanned signature snippet he harvested from our 2025 filings. Sandra didn't ask a single sentimental question. She just dragged the thumb drive into her laptop port and began clicking, for 20 long minutes. The only sound in the office was the low, eager, rhythmic ticking of a brass clock on her bookshelf and the dry rustle of her legal pad as she scribbled down transaction numbers and timestamps. She watched the audit trail, paused the Tuesday audio file at the exact moment Margaret mentioned my blind spot, and leaned back in her chair. She removed her glasses, letting them dangle from a silver chain around her neck, and looked at me with an expression that had zero pity in it. It was pure, cold strategy. Your husband isn't just trying to optimize the loan terms, Lauren, Sandra said, tapping her fountain pen against the edge of my blue folder. This structural adjustment is a predatory draw. If you sign this specific execution waiver on page 14, you are granting him a permanent, unreviewable limited power of attorney over the primary asset. The moment your signature hits that document software, Ethan can legally initiate a cash-out refinance for up to 80% of the property's appraised value. That is exactly $600,000 of pure equity, paid directly to his commercial investment account. And the bank is legally barred from notifying you because you waived the disclosure schedule. Hearing the exact number out loud made my ears hum. A low, buzzing static that made the heavy books on the walls look blurry for a second. $600,000. Nearly every single cent from the liquidation of the logistics company I had built with 12 years of 60-hour work weeks. Can we file for a temporary asset freeze and initiate the divorce petition today? I asked, my fingers tightening around the leather strap of my purse. Sandra shook her head slowly, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. We could, she said, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the desk. But a public divorce filing alerts his firm immediately, and men like Ethan are very good at destroying digital trails and moving funds into secondary shell entities before a family court judge can sign an escrow freeze. I want to catch him with his hand entirely inside the safe. Lauren, here is what we are going to do instead. We are going to let him think his little theater production with his mother worked perfectly. First thing Monday morning, before his mobile notary arrives at your house, I am going to quietly file a formal notice of interest with the County Register of Deeds. It is a silent, internal administrative lock. It doesn't appear on standard consumer banking portals, so Ethan's underwriting dashboard will still show a green light for execution. But the moment that title company attempts to clear the final funding authorization, the system will trigger a mandatory manual review that requires your physical verified appearance before an independent ledger officer. He will walk right into a brick wall at the closing table, and he won't see it coming until the door is already locked behind him. A slow, heavy wave of relief washed through my chest, untying a knot that had been strangling my breathing since Tuesday night. The numbness in my fingers faded, replaced by a hard, steady resolve. He wants me to sign the packet on Monday afternoon, I said, looking out the narrow window toward the gray stone steps of the courthouse. Good, Sandra said, sliding the black thumb drive back into my palm. Go home, Lauren. Pour yourself a glass of wine, look at his catalogs, and act like the trusting wife he thinks he bought. The old iPad Air sat on the bottom shelf of the living room end table, tucked under a stack of old home renovation magazines I hadn't looked at since the move. Ethan had bought it 4 years ago, used it for checking local construction supply rates, and then abandoned it when he upgraded his office desktop. He had completely forgotten that his primary business iCloud account was still active on the device, syncing his workspace documents automatically every time the house Wi-Fi refreshed. It was 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night. Ethan was out cold upstairs, snoring softly into his pillow after spending the evening talking about how beautiful our wraparound porch would look once the new hydrangeas bloomed next spring. I sat on the floor of the dark office, the tablet's cracked glass screen throwing an uneven, pale light across my bare knees. My fingers felt stiff as I clicked into the Files app, bypassing his personal photo streams and going straight into the archived commercial accounting folders labeled Mitchell Development LLC. As a compliance manager, I know that numbers have a voice. They don't have feelings, they don't have charm, and they don't pretend to love you over a bottle of Napa Cabernet. They just tell you exactly where the bleeding started. I opened the commercial ledger for his major commercial project, a multi-unit luxury retail development in downtown Detroit that he had been bragging about to his golf buddies for the last 8 months. That was when the first real fracture in his perfect financial veneer showed itself. Ethan wasn't just looking for an extra cash injection to expand his portfolio. He was drowning. The construction costs on the Detroit site had ballooned by 40% due to a massive zoning delay, and his primary line of credit had been frozen by the secondary underwriters 3 weeks ago. He had missed 2 consecutive contractor payroll cycles, and the commercial entity was facing an immediate chain reaction default. But the real, sickening blow came when I scrolled down into the short-term liability schedules. My breath caught in my throat, my tongue going completely dry as I stared at a scanned deed verification form time-stamped from 60 days ago. Ethan hadn't just put his own company on the line to secure the initial earnest money deposit to keep the Detroit investors from suing him for breach of contract. He had secretly taken out a high-interest bridge loan from a private equity firm, and the primary collateral for that predatory bridge loan was the deed to Margaret's high-rise luxury condo in Grand Rapids, the one she had lived in since his father passed away. The interest rate on the bridge loan was an astronomical 14%, and the entire principal balance was structured as a hard balloon payment. According to the red line notification from the lending firm's legal team, the payment deadline was exactly 5 days from now. 5 days. If Ethan didn't wire exactly $500,000 to the escrow account in Detroit by Friday at 4 p.m., the private equity firm would immediately execute the foreclosure warrant on his own mother's home. And it was worse than that. The financial disclosures included an internal audit note from his construction partners, warning Ethan that if the funds weren't replaced, they were going to report his unauthorized asset reallocations to the state licensing board for third-party financial fraud. I turned the iPad off, the sudden darkness of the room pressing hard against my chest. I leaned my head back against the cold drywall, listening to the old house creak in the autumn wind, feeling an incredibly deep, hollow ache spread through my entire body. The flowers, the romantic weekend trips, the soft, adoring looks at the dinner table while he poured my wine and told me how proud he was of my 12 years of KII. None of it had ever been real. I wasn't his partner, and I wasn't his wife. I was just a liquid asset. I was the final, desperate corporate bailout for a reckless gambler who had run out of time and was about to watch his family's entire house of cards collapse into a criminal investigation. Margaret wasn't just helping him because she was a greedy mother-in-law wanting marble mantelpieces. She was a terrified accomplice trying to save her own ceiling from being sold at a county auction. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking slightly before I forced my knees to lock into place. I walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, looking at the dark outline of the garage. The grief was heavy, but the anger underneath it was turning into pure iron. They thought they had timed everything perfectly around my blind spot. They thought Monday afternoon was going to be their rescue party. I reached into my pocket, grabbed my phone, and sent a single text to Sandra Collins. I have the numbers. Let's finish this tomorrow. The autumn wind was coming off the water, rattling the dry oak leaves across the floor of our new wraparound porch. I sat in one of the wicker chairs, my legs tucked under a wool blanket, staring out into the pitch-black yard. The house behind me was quiet, warm, and completely packed with the physical evidence of the future I thought I had purchased with my own life's work. Then the screen door groaned softly on its springs. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, his wool socks padding silently across the wood planks. He was holding a steaming ceramic mug, the sweet, earthy scent of chamomile cutting through the crisp night air. "Here you go, honey," he murmured, his voice that same gentle, comforting lilt that had grounded me for 8 years. He set the mug down on the small wicker table next to my arm, then stepped up behind my chair. He wrapped his arms slowly around my shoulders, leaning down until his chin rested right against the side of my neck. His skin felt warm. His breath smelled faintly of the mint toothpick he'd been chewing on, and his touch made a sudden, violent wave of pure revulsion flash straight down my spine. It took every single ounce of my corporate compliance training to keep my shoulders from flinching away from his chest. "You've been so quiet all weekend, Lauren," he whispered right into my ear, his hands rubbing my upper arms with a slow, soothing rhythm. "I know the move has been stressful, and dealing with all these administrative bank hoops is the last thing you wanted to do. But after tomorrow afternoon, everything changes. All that financial pressure is going to completely disappear, and we can finally just breathe in this house. In fact, I spent an hour at my desk earlier looking at flights. I'm planning a surprise 2-week trip for us to Maui this January. No laptops, no logistics audits, no client calls. You won't have to think about a single thing, babe." He squeezed me a little tighter, burying his face into my hair, acting the part of the protective, visionary husband who had everything under control. My lungs felt completely flat, like the air in the porch had suddenly turned to thick cement. The utter, breathless audacity of his words, promising a vacation to Hawaii using the exact equity he was about to steal from my father's memory, was a level of sociopathic charm I hadn't known he possessed. I reached down slowly, my fingers slipping into the deep side pocket of my heavy cable-knit cardigan. My thumb brushed against the tiny, metallic edge of the Sony voice recorder I'd bought at the Best Buy on Friday. My fingernail found the small plastic switch, pressing it down into the on position, through the thick fabric of the wool. I could feel the microscopic vibration of the device activating, its tiny red LED light burning a silent, hidden hole in the dark pocket as it captured every single syllable of his fraud. He was documenting his own intent, wrapping it up in a beautiful promise of sand and ocean. I let out a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my dry lips to curve upward into a soft smile. I turned my head slightly, looking right into his handsome, unbothered blue eyes. "That sounds wonderful, Ethan," I said, my voice sounding incredibly light, cooperative, and steady. "Monday it is. Let's just get the notary over here and finish everything on Monday afternoon." He smiled back, deeply relieved, and kissed my cheek before turning to walk back inside the house. I sat there alone in the dark, watching his shadow move through the kitchen window, my hand still clenched tight around the recording device in my pocket. The trap was entirely set, and tomorrow, I was going to let him spring it. The conference room at Reliance Title Company smelled exactly like stale Starbucks coffee, new carpet, and aggressive central air conditioning. It was Monday morning, exactly 10 a.m. The room was enclosed by thick glass walls that looked out onto the busy hallway of the financial district in Grand Rapids. A massive, polished mahogany table occupied the center of the space, reflecting the harsh fluorescent overhead lighting. Ethan and Margaret sat side by side on the right, both looking sharp, tailored, and glowing with that absolute proprietary confidence of people who believed the room already belonged to them. Ethan wore his charcoal gray bespoke suit, his hair neatly combed, while Margaret sat erect in a cream boucle jacket, her fingers lightly tapping a gold Cartier watch. Across from them sat the escrow officer, a tired-looking woman named Brenda, and a young loan officer from the bank who kept checking his iPad screen. Brenda began la tung trang of the closing packet, her mechanical pencil ticking against the heavy bond paper. "We have the primary deed clearing schedules here," Brenda said, her voice dropping into a dull, administrative drone. "And these are the standard post-closing financial disclosure boilerplates for the county tax adjustment." Every flip of the paper felt like a hammer striking a nail inside my head. My chest was so tight it felt like the ribs were digging directly into my lungs. But I kept my face entirely neutral, staring at the blue manila folder. Ethan didn't hesitate for a single second. He unscrewed his sleek, black Mont Blanc pen with a quick, practiced twist of his fingers. He signed his name on the co-borrower line with a flourish. Sharp, heavy, and completely confident. Then, he turned the entire stack of documents around, sliding the heavy blue folder across the mahogany wood until it rested directly between my hands. He placed the silver Mont Blanc pen on top of page 14, giving me that warm, meltingly sweet smile that I now knew was pure poison. "Your turn, sweetheart," he murmured softly, his eyes full of an easy, unbothered reassurance. "Just sign at the bottom of the flagged schedules and we can go grab that celebratory lunch at the bistro down the street." Imagine sitting across from the person you shared a bed with for 8 years, watching him hand you a pen with a smile, knowing he is trying to legally erase your life's work right in front of your face. If you were sitting in my chair at that exact moment, watching him smile, what is the one word that describes what you would be feeling? Drop that single word in the comments right now. I need to know if you'd feel the same way I did. I reached out, my fingers cold and completely numb as they brushed against the heavy metal casing of his pen. I pulled the document toward me, my eyes tracking down the dense, small print paragraphs of page 14. There it was. Buried between the standard escrow lag definitions was the clause, the limited power of attorney provision that Ethan's office IP address had tested 3 weeks ago. My hand started to give a slight, uncontrollable tremor, and the sheer pressure in the room felt like it was going to crush the glass walls. I took the silver cap off the pen, deliberately letting my thumb slip against the polished metal. The heavy cap rolled off the edge of the mahogany table, landing with a soft thud onto the thick gray carpet below. "Oh, I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice sounding small, frail, and perfectly compliant. I bent down slowly, slipping out of my chair, using the darkness beneath the table to drag in a deep, desperate breath of air, counting the seconds as they ticked away on my watch. 30 seconds of pure, stalling silence. 30 seconds for the hallway door to open. My fingers were hovering right over the signature line, the cold metal tip of the silver pen practically touching the crisp white paper. I could hear Ethan's shallow, eager breathing next to me, his body leaning slightly forward over the mahogany table. Then, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung open with a sharp click. Sandra Collins walked in, her tailored gray wool coat unbuttoned, carrying her leather briefcase under one arm with a calm, unbothered precision. Right behind her was a tall man in a khaki uniform, an official county court officer holding a small, stamped stack of legal documents. "Good morning," Sandra said, her voice pitched perfectly for the room, low, professional, and entirely devoid of drama. "I am here on behalf of my client, Lauren Mitchell, to formally serve a temporary protective injunction regarding the property at this address." Ethan's head snapped up so fast I heard his neck joints pop. He bolted out of his leather chair, his palms slamming hard against the table, sending his glass of water sloshing over the side. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his face instantly turning a mottled, furious red as he glared from Sandra to the officer. "Lauren, what did you do? Have you completely lost your mind? This is a private family matter." That was the exact second the dam broke inside me. Every single ounce of the sickening, suffocating revulsion I had been locking behind my ribs for 7 straight days came roaring to the surface. But I didn't scream, and I didn't shed a single tear. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a deliberate, scraping thud that silenced the room instantly. I leaned forward, planting my knuckles firmly on the mahogany table, looking directly into Ethan's panicked, bulging blue eyes, and then over at Margaret, whose teacup was frozen halfway to her mouth. My voice came out incredibly cold, sharp, and damped up, cutting through the sterile room like an iron blade. "Family? Ethan?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet but echoing off the glass walls. "Is family when you and your mother sit on my new living room sofa and plan how to sandwich a fraudulent, limited power of attorney form into a stack of routine paperwork because you assume I'm too stupid to look past page 14? Ethan opened his mouth, his jaw twitching, but nothing came out. "Is family when you steal my scanned signature from our tax filings to test the bank's digital verification parameters? Is family when you look me in the eye on our porch? Promise me a trip to Hawaii, and massage my shoulders while actively turning my 12 years of KAI into a liquidity tool to bail out your failed, bankrupt investment in Detroit." Margaret's face drained of color so fast it looked like old, gray ash. "Lauren, dear, you're being hysterical," she stammered, her voice thin and completely stripped of its usual haughty authority. "This is just an efficient financial structure." "Shut up, Margaret," I said, not even looking at her. Sandra didn't waste a single breath arguing. She walked straight to the wall monitor, unzipped her briefcase, and snapped a black thumb drive into the media port. The large screen behind the escrow officer instantly flickered to life. Instead of the bank's green lending portal, it displayed a massive, red-lined compliance spread, the DocuSign audit trail showing the precise IP addresses from Ethan's commercial office, tracking every single verification test he had run on my signature. Then, Sandra pressed play. The cheap monitor speakers filled the room with the crisp, unmistakable sound of Ethan's voice from Tuesday night. "She thinks this house is her fresh start. She won't assume her husband is auditing her." Then Margaret's voice, clear as day. "She has a massive blind spot. She believes you. Just sandwich the disclosure form between page 14 and page 15. The escrow officer's eyes widened to the size of quarters. She looked at the metadata on the screen, looked down at the signature packet, and then immediately reached out, grabbing the blue folder away from Ethan's side of the table. "This transaction is officially terminated," the escrow officer announced, her voice trembling slightly as she slapped a red void stamp across the primary deed documents. "We are flagging this file immediately for suspected third-party financial fraud." Ethan slumped back into his chair, his shoulders dropping as his eyes locked onto the looping metadata on the wall. The powerful, brilliant architect of finance had unraveled in less than 3 minutes, exposed completely by the very ledger he thought I'd never read. The fluorescent lights of the title company hallway felt way too bright, buzzing with a low, irritating hum that made my head pound. Behind the glass doors of the conference room, things were already fracturing into complete chaos. I could hear the loan officer slamming his cell phone shut, pacing the carpet while Bark talking to his bank's compliance division about immediate risk management and locking down Ethan's other corporate lines. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I just walked out, my heels hitting the linoleum in a steady, heavy beat, with Sandra and the court officer trailing a few steps behind me. The heavy glass exit door pushed open, and the cold, damp Michigan air hit my face, smelling like wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. Lauren, wait. Please, just stop for 1 second." Ethan's voice didn't have that smooth, practiced rhythm anymore. It was high, reedy, and cracked down the middle as he sprinted across the concrete baie. I reached my Lexus, unlocked it with a quick click of the fob, and pulled the heavy door open. Before I could even swing my leg inside, Ethan slammed his hands against the top of the car door, his fingers gripping the metal frame so hard his knuckles turned completely white. His soft cashmere sweater was caught on his watch strap, the expensive wool pulling apart into a messy, frayed thread. His hair, usually perfectly parted, was plastered to his forehead by the damp drizzle. "Lauren, please, you have to talk to the escrow manager," he stammered, his eyes darting around wildly like a cornered animal. "Tell them it was a communication error. Tell them we had an agreement. I can fix the Detroit accounts by next quarter. I swear to God I can. But you need to sign that authorization sheet right now." I didn't answer him. I just pulled my legs into the driver's seat and reached for the start button. Out of the corner of my eye, past the hood of my car, I saw Margaret. The elegant, unbothered Kungan Hong Vien was leaning heavily against a square concrete support pillar near the building entrance. Her silver tape measure was gone, and her hands were shaking so violently she couldn't even manage to punch the lock screen code into her iPhone. She dropped the phone twice on the wet cement, the glass screen shattering into a spiderweb grid under her leather boots. She looked 90 years old. Ethan leaned further into my window frame, his breath fogging up the edge of my rearview mirror. "Are you even listening to me?" he shouted, his voice dropping into a desperate, raw panic that made my stomach tighten with absolute disgust. "Do you have any idea what you just did in there? If that cash-out refinance doesn't clear the automated funding queue before the 4 p.m. cutoff today, the Detroit Equity Group is executing the default warrant on the bridge loan. The bank is going to foreclose on my mother's high-rise condo on Friday morning. She'll be out on the street. Lauren, everything we built, everything my family owns, is completely gone because you wanted to have a grand performance with a lawyer." I sat perfectly still behind the steering wheel, my hand resting on the leather shifter. The deep, hollow ache from Sunday night was entirely gone, burned out by a cold, permanent clarity. I rolled the power window down just 3 inches, looking at the wet, pathetic face of the man I had shared a bed with for 8 years. He looked like a stranger. "You're right, Ethan," I said, my voice sounding flat, steady, and incredibly quiet in the damp air. "Your mother is going to lose her house. But that isn't happening because of my lawyer, and it isn't happening because of my compliance file. It's happening because she chose to be the architect for her son's theft. She knew exactly what you were burying on page 14, and she pat my hand while you tried to strip away my life's work to pay off your own gambles." I started the engine, the low hum of the Lexus filling the tight space between us. "Take your hand off my car, Ethan," I said, looking straight through the windshield. "Go take whatever paperwork you have left and try to broker a deal with your own arrogance." He let go of the door frame like the metal had suddenly turned to fire. I backed out of the space, the tires giving a soft chirp on the wet asphalt, leaving them both standing under the gray Michigan sky. It has been exactly 3 months since that rainy Monday at the title company. I am sitting out on the wraparound porch of my colonial house right now, holding a warm ceramic mug of black coffee between my palms. The Michigan air has turned genuinely crisp, and I've been watching the very last of the dry brown maple leaves drift down onto the garden beds. Yesterday, I spent 2 hours with a shovel, turning over the dark, damp soil along the front walkway. I'm preparing the ground for hydrangeas. They won't bloom until next spring, of course, but there is a strange, quiet comfort in doing the groundwork for a future you actually own. The divorce didn't drag out into a long, dramatic court battle like you see on television. Sandra Collins handled the restructuring of the property assets with the same cold, unyielding precision she used during our first meeting. Once the county register processed the compliance files and the recorded audit trails, Ethan's legal team realized they had zero ground to stand on. He filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 2 weeks later. His commercial entity, Mitchell Development LLC, was completely dissolved by the state regulators, and the luxury retail site in Detroit was taken over by the primary lenders. And just as the bridge loan terms predicted, the private equity group executed the foreclosure on Margaret's high-rise condo in Grand Rapids. It went to a county sheriff's auction on a Tuesday morning. I didn't go to the auction, and I didn't celebrate when Sandra called to tell me the deed was wiped. I just felt a deep, clean sense of release. I kept my house, my savings, and every single dollar from the liquidation of my business, completely insulated from Ethan's $1 million default. Just an hour ago, while the coffee machine was dripping in the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unverified 10-digit number from a prepaid SIM card. I opened it, and the text read, "Did you ever actually love me, Lauren? Or did you just view our entire marriage as a compliance target to be audited?" I didn't get angry. My heart didn't even skip a beat. I didn't type out a long vindictive response, and I didn't delete the thread either. I just locked the metadata into my personal archive file, hit the block button, and set the phone face down. He is still trying to turn his financial fraud into an emotional argument, but numbers don't care about emotional arguments, and neither do I. Looking back on those 7 days after we moved in, I realize how close I came to losing everything my father and I KAI for 12 years to build. I wanted to believe the smooth, gentle promises because it was easier than facing a terrifying reality. And that is exactly what people like Ethan count on. They count on our desire for peace to keep us from looking at the boilerplate clauses. So I want you to listen to me very carefully right now. People rarely steal a house. What they really steal is the signature of someone who trusted them too much. Never let anyone tell you that verifying your own assets is a sign of distrust. If they love you, they will want the ledger to be out in the open, under the bright daylight. If they keep pushing you to sign in the dark, pull out your own shovel and start digging into the trail. If you were standing in my shoes on that rainy Monday, would you have played the long game to catch them at the closing table? Or would you have confronted them the second you heard the audio file? Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I really want to know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are tonight. Your support is the reason I am standing on solid ground today. We have so many more journeys of survival, second chances, and hard-won dignity to share with you on this channel. So please hit that subscribe button so you never miss a real story like this one. In our very next video, we are diving into an incredible account about a retired school teacher who discovered her son-in-law had quietly modified her late husband's probate trust using a digital notary app. It is a chilling look at how easily people can slip fraud into family traditions. And you absolutely do not want to miss how she used her own meticulous record-keeping to lock him out of the estate completely. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. Keep your eyes open, protect your peace, and let's keep walking this road together.